Good, right, a lot of familiar faces. um, this feels like an art history lecture at 2 o'clock on a weekday, which I used to do over a decade ago, but it has that same sort of afternoon feeling. What I'm going to talk about today is really an update on what I should have talked about more recently. That is an update on two things. First of all, my 1990 article on the St Andrews cupboard, which we'll see more of, and secondly, my investigation of distinctive features of a chair type in northeast Fife, known as the cacateurs or the cacatois to some people. So, an anthology of things northeast Fife. So I'll start off with the St Andrews cupboard, which I've just popped into the museum and checked that they hadn't kidnapped it from College Hall and taken it there, because it belongs in College Hall in St Mary's, and long may it remain there undisturbed, because this is a remarkable piece of early 16th century furniture. An oak armoire or cupboard which has been in St Mary's College for most of the 20th century. Previously kept in St Salvator's, and it actually has a label inside it which says this cupboard is the property of St Salvator's College, do not remove, but it's now found its way into St Mary's somehow. In 1990 I noted the appearance of, I noted a certain iconography on the carved front of this cupboard, and that iconography is comprised of a thistle. Can you see that there, just about? A thistle on that side, on a vine plant, a rose, and a tiny marguerite. But I'll leave you to find that yourselves. There it is. Yes, that was just playing for time there. There it is, a marguerite, or a gowan, up in the top left-hand corner. The iconography celebrates the marriage of James IV to Margaret Tudor, which was occurred in 1502 and was ratified in 1503. So this piece of furniture is exceptionally rare in being a surviving piece of that date. It's unusual to find furniture, particularly of this size, surviving from the early 1500s. It's like hen's teeth, but St Andrews is lucky in having a little group of things, of which this is the major piece. As a piece of furniture in the Queen's bedchamber. Now, that was an inventory made by the Lord High Treasurer of Scotland about 3 years after this cupboard was made. And what we have to ask ourselves is, who made it? Who made the inventory to include this cupboard? Well, the person who made it was a man called James Beaton, who lived from 1473 until 1539. And he, of course, was a churchman and a friend of James IV. He graduated from St Andrews in 1493, aged 20, and became the Abbot of Dunfermline, which post he held at the time of James's marriage in 1502. James IV, who was the person celebrated in this cupboard along with his wife Margaret Tudor, made him the Chancellor of Scotland, Lord High Chancellor of Scotland. Amongst many posts that James Beaton held included archbishoprics in Glasgow and latterly St Andrews. So James Beaton is a fundamental figure of importance in association with this cupboard. Not Cardinal Beaton, his nephew, who was David Beaton, but James Beaton, a contemporary of James IV. Now, I should really have a portrait of James Beaton, but I didn't find one to put up. Imagine that you're looking at him. Yes. Oh, yes, June, you certainly can. Well, all the other symbols are vines growing from a woody stem. You see there's a woody stem there from which vine leaves grow, and it's a Renaissance image or motif, which of course has biblical origins, that life grows from the woody stem. Giles, I don't know the particular biblical reference for that, but there are several, yes, good. Right. So it shows life sprouting from a woody stem, which is a standard Renaissance motif, but in this case it's been Scotticized, if you like, by the addition of the thistle and the other flowers. So I was talking about James Beaton holding several archbishoprics. One of his archbishoprics included the Priory of Arbroath, which is important because it appears that whilst he was archbishop, he commissioned this panelling for the Priory House at Arbroath. And you can see that in addition to having figurative panels, there are panels with a hybrid plant, including different kinds of leaves and a thistle, which represents the House of Stuart. Now, I'm not saying that this is by the same hand, but I am saying that it has the same iconography as the St Andrew's cupboard, and it's early 16th century. So, in my article, I had speculated that the cupboard may be a piece of university furniture because it had belonged in the university for so many centuries. And I looked into the inventories of university furniture and found lots of interesting material and cupboards mentioned also, but not this particular cupboard or the first slide that I showed. What I've now decided is that it clearly isn't a piece of university furniture. It's a piece of royal furniture, and that is ratified by its inclusion in the inventory made by James Beaton. And what is more, we must ask ourselves, how did it end up in the university? Well, it seems that James Beaton, who ended up as the Archbishop of St Andrews, living in the castle, just down, where are we? Is it lost my direction, down that way, may have had it as part of his furnishings in the castle after James IV died at Flodden in 1513. I'm just speculating about this, but it seems to me that James Beaton very probably commissioned the cupboard for the wedding, for the royal wedding. And then I think that it's very possible that he then took it to safety, appropriated it for himself in the castle. And then comes the Reformation, and James Beaton dies in the castle in 1539. Somehow it jumps from the castle to the university, but it would make sense that the university becomes a place of sanctuary for it when the castle is denuded of its contents. So it's a work in progress, but that's what I think. Right, and James Beaton, the uncle of David Beaton, seems to be a patron of carving in this style, both in St Andrews but also in Arbroath that we see here. So this Arbroath panelling is an example of fixed furniture. It was made for the Priory House. It belonged on the wall of the Priory House. We can assume that we shouldn't assume things, but we can we can establish that it was very probably made for that building and therefore represents a local style, if you like. We have to work from somewhere when we're researching furniture of the early 16th century. So the best place to work from is a fixed monument like this. Church furniture is often a good place to start when you're studying furniture in a region, which I like to do. And pulpits, what's better than a pulpit to start off? Angus is a place where there are several examples of carved oak pulpits, mainly 17th century actually. This is the one at Dun, and it displays a vocabulary, a rather geometric carving, from which one could then extrapolate to say, well, I found this chair, which has got, a very similar scheme of carving on it. Could this chair be made in Angus within a radius of the place where that pulpit occurs? Does that make sense? You start with a fixed thing, and then you move on to movable furniture, and you try to build a picture of a regional style. Now, that would seem straightforward, except for the fact that pulpits are notoriously movable, and this pulpit is about to move again, I think, because very sadly, the church at Dun either has closed or is closing, and it's going to be sold, this pulpit, or disposed of anyway. I mean, it's a terrible thing in Scotland that we don't have any national regulation of church contents, and that nor are churches protected by the state, like they are in Scandinavian countries, Sweden and Denmark, where this wouldn't happen. You wouldn't find a piece of important furniture like this simply being disposed of on the decision of the church elders or the or the Church of Scotland, indeed. Anyway, that's a little sideline. Pulpits are not always trustworthy as fixed monuments. This very probably is a piece of Angus woodwork, but in fact it was moved about and only moved into Dun Church from somewhere else in the 19th century. And the same applies to the pulpit in St Andrews, known as John Knox's pulpit. John Knox's pulpit is presently in St Silvester's, where this is photographed. It is partly a 16th century pulpit. These panels are all 16th century. The back isn't. That's later. So it's a bit of a hybrid. It was in the town kirk in Holy Trinity, from where John Knox is supposed to have preached from that pulpit in 1559. Whether he did or not, we can't prove, but as I say, the panels are 16th century, but it's an example of something that's been moved, and I think it was probably moved into St Silvester's in the 1930s when the interior was refurbished. It's a famous pulpit. Hay Fleming talks about it, the historian of St Andrews. It's written about quite a lot, and it also appears in paintings as well. As you said, it's a celebrity piece of furniture, and one interesting painting that it appears in is this, the Ordination of the Elders, by John Henry Lorimer, which is painting which a lot of you will be familiar. Now, I think this is long held to be a picture of elders in Carnby Kirk, just by Arncroach in the Sneuk. But in fact, it's the subject of great artistic license, because if you look at it, this isn't Carnby. That is the St Andrews pulpit, is the John Knox pulpit, along with the presenter's desk in the front. All these figures, I'll make a slight little concession and start talking about people rather than furniture. but these figures here are all local farmers and local East Neuk people that John Henry Lorimer knew. This man is... I've disturbed the glove, Catherine, there we are. This man here is the local blacksmith, James Bennett, B-E-N-N-E-T, a young man there who worked for Robert Lorimer, the designer, making ironwork for him. I find it very interesting because he could almost be a blacksmith or a plumber in the East Neuk today, you know, James Bennett. And this hybrid composition is explained in a note in Crail Kirk, which Marjorie Richardson, is she called Marjorie Richardson of Crail? Lives in the Old Manse. She's a member of the society. Anyway, Marjorie, yes, it's Marjorie. Marjorie brought this to my attention when I was in Crail Kirk looking at other things, and it's a note on a photogravure print of that painting, signed by John Henry Lorimer, 1st of November 1900. And it explains who the people are. You see, there's James Bennett, number 2. But up in the top right-hand corner, it says pulpit from John Knox in the University Hall. So he's saying that, St Andrews, so he's saying that that pulpit was in University Hall, if he means that, when he painted this painting. The window, done as Ristelrig Kirk near Edinburgh. So the window is a detail from that other church. The pews, done in the old Kirk barnyards, wherever that is, I haven't found out. But barnyards is where? Yes, there's a barnyards in. Yes, there's a barnyards in Fife, but is there a church there? No, no. So I don't know. I mean, he's definitely copying pews. So I'm wondering if there's a barnyard somewhere else in the Lothians or something. What I want to talk about in the rest of the lecture, in this anthology, is actually chairs. Now, I want to talk about a particular type of chair that we are very lucky in having several examples of in Fife. This chair is called a caqueteuse, a French name written there. Before I show you one, I'll show you where this particular kind of chair was distributed in Scotland during the late 16th and early 17th centuries. It was distributed along the northeast coast, along the boroughs, in the boroughs and the important cities, and also to a certain extent in Caithness and Orkney. The reason why it occurs in Caithness and Orkney is because of the supply links from Aberdeen. That island and that coast is mainly supplied by sea from Aberdeen. So any cultural influences come from the northeast coast up onto the extremity, the Ultima Thule, the sort of the northern extremity of the country. So this is what the caqueteuse chair looks like. It's an example from Aberdeen that I'm showing here, dated 1627. A caqueteuse chair has got a long, a narrow back, sometimes tall. It's got a triangular seat or a trapezoidal seat, and it's got wonderful sort of serpentine arms that enclose the sitter, that sort of grasp you when you sit in it. And it's a type which is not unique to Scotland because it appears in France, but it is not an English type of chair. Okay, so it appears in northeast Scotland and France, and the heyday of it was about 1590 to about 1640. All right, and it's known as the caqueteuse. Shall I just turn back to the so you can get the spelling of it? The caqueteuse, because that was an antique dealer's term. I couldn't find any example of the French referring to their own 16th century and early 17th century chairs as cacateurs chairs. The name comes from the French verb, however, caqueter, to gossip, okay, to chatter. It's usually applied to chickens and hens, you know, the way in which they they chatter amongst themselves. And the first appearance of it is in the Cabinet Maker and Art Furnisher of 1891. So it's very late that the name was applied to this type of chair. And it's indicative of antique dealers wanting to give things names, like farthingale chair. You know, that didn't exist in the 17th century. Very fond of applying the word gossip in different languages to furniture, antique dealers. I don't know why, but perhaps because they thought that you know, this chair with its triangular seat was easy to lean over and talk to your gossip to your neighbour, you know. But anyway, it's the feminine form of the verb caqueter, because the masculine form is caquetoir. And although that is the term that the 19th century dealers applied to this type of chair in 1891, or was recognized in 1891, it's a term which is now disputed. Can you imagine that furniture historians have disputes over these kind of things? Because it's thought to be misogynistic, you know? It's thought that you should not you should not refer to women as being idle gossips. And so what we should call these chairs now is cacatoir, not cacateurs. So I'm just warning you about that. So there we are. Whatever you want to say, cacateurs or cacatoir. I just call it a deacon's chair, actually, to avoid argument. It's one from the collection of these chairs in Aberdeen Trades Incorporation Hospital. There are 15 of them there, looked after by the various Aberdeen trades. And I think I have mentioned before in lectures, I've asked people to, if they agree with my assertion that the form of a cacateur's chair reflects the form of a tower house in that it has a plain shaft which then blossoms into profile detail at the top. And if I show you a tower house like Craigievar, you can agree or not that these two types, one a building and the other a piece of furniture, I think are related in their conceptual design. And indeed, one would expect that a tower house like that, owned by a merchant called Forbes, would have been furnished with cacateur's chairs in the 1620s. Now, to come to Fife in a bit more detail, we're very lucky in Fife in having several of these, this type of chair, but the Fife examples are distinctive and different from the Aberdeen types. The Fife examples, of which this is one from St Monant's, which was used by the town bailies of the borough of St Monant's in 1618, are a bit smaller, a bit shorter than the Aberdeen ones, and they have a distinctive vocabulary of special features. Just go through them. Very interesting flourishes of a canthus leaf. I think, Catherine, a canthus leaf, or that's what I'm calling it, on the cresting there. These angled palmettes, like that, stiff palm leaves, angled at 45 degrees. These feathered penna, you would call them, in a sort of strictly. These pilasters in the shape of quills or feathers, and a back panel with strange sheaves, almost looking like tied sheaves of corn. Can you see that? Around a rosette. All those are Fife features. And this is one of the chairs that was used by the bailies or the town councillors of St Monans in the early 17th century. And they, rather like the Dun pulpit, were the subject of almost tragic disappearance in 1974 on local government reorganisation, which I think was 74 or 75 thereabouts. That the boroughs were abolished at that time. Cooper no longer had a provost or a town council, nor did a place like St Monans or Stonehaven or all these boroughs up the coast. And therefore, the furnishings of their rooms or offices was declared redundant, and in many cases disappeared completely. The oak chairs from Stonehaven, for instance, ended up under the stage in the town hall, used for plays, as props for plays, and then subsequently disappeared. The St Monans ones were only rescued on the initiative of the East Neuk of Fife Preservation Society. So jolly good that they were, and I think they're now back in the care of the local council. It's rather a bad thing, actually, because the council almost caused their disappearance in the first place. But again, this makes me think of the fact that politicians never think about furniture. Why is it? You know, they said, oh, we'll just abolish the boroughs. You know, do they think about this? Do they think it through? You must think about furniture in all cases, because it's the stuff of life, isn't it? So, St Monans. Yes, it is. It is. Yes, yes. That's right. Yes, and yes, and I can never keep track. They were in store in Kirkcaldy for a while, but I think they might have gone back to, one or two of them might have gone back to the little museum in St Monans. You know, the little museum on the front at St Monans. I haven't checked. They were, yes, yes. Right. This is another example of one of those Bailey's chairs, a smaller, shorter example, and you can see it's been repaired. It's had this piece of undulating carved wood put on the top to replace what would have been an acanthus flourish, an elaborate cresting. But the person who repaired it probably hadn't seen what the broken off bit was like. It does have, however, very distinctive Fife vocabulary, these fleshy rosettes, one in the back panel, one in the cresting panel. And just out of interest, the cresting panel is constructed in the French way. It's like a tab, it's like a sort of a key that sits in between the two styles. Can you see that? That's a very Fife way of making a chair. So all that is one piece, that tab and the cresting here. It is a very distinctive Fife method of construction. A cautionary tale to furniture historians is demonstrated by the fact that the celebrated William Wheeler of Arncroke, the furniture maker, was asked or decided to make a copy of this chair around 1890, and he copied it as it was with the repair. But can you see that he just made the whole thing new out of wood, so that anybody trying to research these chairs at a later date would think, oh, that's what they looked like. In fact, he was just repeating a mistake. Nevertheless, it's a very faithful copy otherwise, and it continues, if you like, the tradition of making these chairs in Fife. And I'll return to that later. The smaller St. Monant's chair here, with this lightly incised decoration, you see that's just sort of very light relief, is, I think, from a different workshop from this one, which is much more deeply carved and has a slightly different vocabulary. Doesn't have these large fleshy rosettes, one in the back panel and one in the cresting, for instance. So although it's in St. Monant's, it probably comes, I think, from the hand of a different workman. But the same workman who made that, I think, probably made this, which is a kind of random example of a Cacateur's chair. It's owned by the Crawfords at Norton House near Balmerino. It's a lovely little chair, and it's got the classic fleshy rosette in the back and fleshy rosette in the cresting rail. It's got that French type of tab keyed in cresting, and it's got what you expect, the elaborate scrolls on the top there, what William Wheeler didn't put on his chair. So we can say that there are two examples, at least, from this workshop. The reason why this chair has survived is because the Crawfords' forebears, the Duncans of Norton, decided to make an oak bedroom in about 1895. It was fashionable to have a romantic sort of medieval style of oak furniture in a bedroom. So they must have acquired this chair locally at the time when they did that, and it's oak panelled with a carved oak wardrobe and dressing table, etc. All rather dark and gloomy, but it's still there at Norton House, and so is the chair. This slide shows the detail, I think, in better contrast. You can see there. So that's about 1630. Again, it could be earlier. Another example by the same man who made one of the St. Monant's chairs. So did this come from the East Neuk? We have to ask ourselves, and then end up in Balmerino. It leads us on to extrapolate about other chairs. This is one that Peter Adamson, who I haven't seen for about 10 years, but I'm sure he's still cycling around St. Andrews, photographed for me in Glasgow. And although it's a chair that was paid for by William Burrell and is now in the Glasgow Museum's collection, it is a Fife chair. And we can tell that because it's got, look, the rosette in the back panel, a rosette in the top panel, and it's got the same sort of compact proportions as a Fife Cacateur's chair. So I'm sticking my neck out and saying that it is, but is this from a different workshop again? Because instead of the angled palmettes, you've got little fleshy tendrils there, you see? They're at a 45-degree angle again, but they are not palmettes, they're sort of fern fronds or something. And the rosettes themselves have got much bigger petals than the rosettes on the St. Monant's chair. It was made for MS, whoever that is. Without heraldry, it's very difficult to identify, but one could speculate about Fife surnames beginning with S to try and work out. There's initials M and S. M It's not Marks and Spencer's, Anne. Home department. MS, can you see there in the middle of the rosette? So it's not a signature, it's just simply the name of the owner or the owners of the chair. In Scotland, it was very much a convention to put the initials of an owner onto a chair at this date. Not the maker, no, never the maker. Otherwise, I wouldn't be up here sort of trying to speculate about all this. So, if we return to the best example of the St. Monan's chairs, which has got this peculiar sheaf motif on, there's no indication of the maker. There's a date on it, 1618 there. But what are we to make of this feature that doesn't appear anywhere else on carved oak furniture? We can see it on panelling. This is panelling, which is at present in Crail Kirk. And can you see that same feature, the tied sheaves with a rosette in the centre, flanked by these, what I call penna, or sort of upright feather quills? It's just about exactly the same vocabulary as that on the chair back. So I'm kind of speculating as to whether there was some connection between these two motifs, the motifs on the panelling and the motif on the chair. And if we open it up further, we can see that that the whole thing is actually a pew frontal, made in 1605 for the Cunningham family of barns near Crail. So I'm just wondering, was the workshop that made the St. Monan's chair with its distinctive sheaves the same workshop that produced the carving here in Crail Kirk? It's the right date, and we're beginning to fill in a picture of a local style that is applied to some different objects. It's remarkable this has survived, because Crail Kirk, as you know, was completely refurbished in 1963, and all the pews were ripped out. And only, I think, by the initiative of a joiner were these rescued. They represent the identity of a local family, the Cunninghams of Barnes, a now disappeared mansion house, well, a tower house, a small tower house that would have been on the site of what's now Third Part. Barnesmuir Farm was part of the Barnes estate, and although the castle did exist in the late 18th century, it was just a pile of stones. So it's long gone, but the Barnes family, the Cunninghams of Barnes, were a family of great local influence, enough influence to have all this wonderful carving made for their pew in their kirk, and no doubt for carved furniture in their tower house. This is their coat of arms and the date. And the coat of arms is interesting. It's a shake fork. You see that? A very sort of agricultural implement, perhaps indicating the origin of their estate and its wealth. But really beautiful carving. These little scrolls here, very detailed, confidently carved quills at the side, and very comparable, as I'm trying to argue, to a chair back. Now, this is by no means the most elaborate pew frontal that has survived at Crail Kirk. This is probably the best one. I'll just show a selection. Isn't that remarkable? You know, who needs to talk about about Renaissance imagery when we've got this in Fife? Look at that, it's fantastic. 1595. This is the Lumsdens of Airdrie, another local family who had pews in Crail Kirk. But the confidence of these flourishes is absolutely amazing. The rhythm, the bravura, and the deep carved relief of that carving. Also, of course, the carving of the animals. I suppose when wild boar still existed in Fife at that time. I don't know about lions, but the boar appears twice in the Lumsden's heraldry. The Lumsdens, by the way, a very influential family who also, a branch of which owned Innergelly House, and I think were very involved in the promotion of Thomas Chippendale later on as a cabinet maker, but that's another lecture. I'll just show a selection of the panels, elaborate and less elaborate ones. I think some of the other panels at Crail are less elaborate because they are subsidiary to the main pew frontal, or because they depict the arms of women. And this is one of the latter. This is Helen Merton of Cambo, the family before the Erskines came to Cambo, and also represented in Crail Kirk. And then this is David Merton of Randeston, next door to Cambo, all very interrelated, all these local East Neuk families. And then James Learmonth of Balcomie, 1594. And lastly, in this little group, Catherine Lindsay of Wormiston. The Lindsays of Wormiston also major patrons of decorative work at that time. But I think that little anthology there shows you that there was a close-knit group of estates of families who were all able to commission woodworkers to produce carved work for them, and all probably had marvellous little Cacateurs chairs in their houses from the same workshop, wherever it was. But they're all sort of gentry families, you know. What about the urban customers in the East Neuk? What about the merchants of Anstruther and Pittenweem? Were they also commissioning chairs? Well, it seems that they were, because we have examples like this, and these are just examples which are emerging, partly due to the internet, really, partly due to things like eBay and, you know, sort of the fact that you can look up auctions all over the country, all over the world, and see Cacateurs chairs. This one was very definitely not commissioned by a gentry family. It was commissioned by a merchant called David Wade, who and his wife Margaret Oliphant. Their initials are on it twice. DWMO in the top and DWMO in the bottom. Probably they're thinking that if the questing broke off, you would still have their initials on the back. A kind of little guarantee. 1628. The Wades were a very old established family, even in 1628 in Anstruther, but also owned property in Pittenweem. What we have here is very much a Cacateurs chair, but I think not from the same workshop that we've been talking about at Crail Kirk. You can see that the feathered quill pilasters are not as confidently carved. The cresting is rather different. It's got a little sort of roof, a little pediment on it, and it's got this interesting sort of rusticated stonework kind of carving on the front seat rail. One wonders whether this might have been made by somebody who could also turn his hand to stonemasonry. And I've often thought that with the wonderful church monuments in the Fife coastal boroughs, particularly Crail, you know, were the tombstones carved by the same people who carved wooden chairs, because they're often very similar. So we have here a different workshop and a different type of customer. We can look at randomly occurring chairs and sort of join them into our picture. And this is another one which has no firm provenance. It's just made for somebody called F.R. If you can think of a Fife surname that begins with R and give me some ideas, I'd be very grateful. I haven't really been able to start on that one. But I can say that this chair is obviously Fife made because it exhibits features which we can see on other chairs. Look at the rusticated stonework on the seat rail. Look at the little angled palmettes, very crudely done, but that's a Fife feature. And again, the quills, the penna at the side, again, very simply done. So a different workshop, but certainly a kind of approximation of scrolls. Can you see that? I haven't quite understood that those should be acanthus scrolls turning in. Interestingly, the back, which looks like a radiator, is a sort of an approximation of linen fold carving, folded linen, which was a common feature of late 16th century and early 17th century wood carving. But it appears in that particular form, perhaps confusingly, at Crail Church again. And when I was in Crail photographing the panelling, I didn't photograph the less important bits which date from the 16th century. I should have done, because I could then have pointed to that as a comparison with this chair. So did this chair come from the East Neuk? Did it come from Crail, but a different workshop? Who knows? It's definitely a Fife chair. Further inland, in Cooper, this chair turned up in the county town in the 19th century and was bought by somebody in Dundee who had it restored, a Mr. Lyle from Dundee, in the same spirit that the Nortons made their oak bedroom in a kind of, by the late 19th century, old oak was very valued. The history of it wasn't valued, it was just valued for its look. It's like sort of half-timbered cottages and things like that. This was a good thing to have. In a way, that's happening today. People collect oak furniture and they don't bother what it is, they just want it because it looks good in a castle. You know what I mean? But this is clearly, wherever it comes from originally, it's clearly a Fife chair. It's got the rosette in the back, the rosette in the cresting, it's got the French style of construction. It's even got the sheaves. Can you see that? A kind of strange, faint memory of the sheaves and turned around into the horizontal mode rather than the vertical, that surround or flank the rosette in the St. Monan's chair. So one wonders about this. Is it somebody who's seen something and wants to recreate it, but they're not on the spot? Is it somebody inland? Was this chair made in the interior of Fife by somebody who knew about the chairs in the boroughs on the coast? Who knows? It's got a little better understanding of the idea that these should be foliate scrolls on the top, but not a good understanding. You can see the notch in the top where the scroll should meet, but it's an abstraction of the classical vocabulary of which the coastal boroughs are so much more confidently aware. And I think the reason is that it's the coastal boroughs such as Crail and St. Monant's and Anstruther and Pittenweem who have that trade contact with the continent. And so their education, their visual education is so much better than workshops maybe inland. So the jury should be out as to whether a chair like this is, inland or coastal Fife. So to conclude about the chairs, what have we got? Well, we've got at least 4 different workshops, all making the same kind of small caqueteurs or cacatois chair in a period this is 1618, this is 1610, 1630. These ones, that's 1610 to 28. This one might be a bit later. This one might be sort of almost 1640. But a period between, say, the early 1600s and 1640, 4 workshops creating chairs of the same general type with slightly different decorative vocabulary. Were they seen by people? This is an interesting question to ask. Well, those, the top 2, probably were, because as Anne said, you saw them, didn't you, in the Bailey's in the meeting room? So they were exposed to a certain section of the public. This one was in a private house, but guests at Norton House have slept in the oak bedroom. The observant ones might have spotted that in the gloom, the sepulchral gloom of the oak. These ones probably not, because these 2 chairs disappeared into the antiques market and have only recently surfaced. So a chair like this is quite interesting, because Wheeler of Arncroke, making a copy, was obviously quite interested in the cacateurs as a form. He was obviously casting around for ideas as to what to make, but by doing so, he was kind of publicizing it, you know, as a local type of chair. Didn't really understand it, but he was publicizing it. Now, so I see this as a sort of a talisman type of chair. You know, Wheeler has picked it out. He's made it. He's exposed it to the public consciousness. Who else saw it, do you think? I think the man who made this, who designed this, saw, if not that chair, he saw the small Cacateurs Fife compact type of chair, because he creates his own version in just the same proportions, not the same decoration, but the same proportions. And that man was George Walton, the Glaswegian contemporary of Charles Rennie Mackintosh, who got a lot of ideas from Scottish furniture. He didn't advertise it and say, "Oh, this is Scottish." He wasn't a nationalist in his design ideas. He simply used them as good ideas, and he made furniture for the owner of Rowntree's, the sweet company, for their cafe in Scarborough, based, I think, on the Fife Cacatois. Now, the question is, did he come to Fife? Well, he did, but I can't prove that he came to the coast. He came to stay with his brother, the painter E.A. Walton, in Ceres in 1890, which fits quite well with the fact that he that he could have seen a Cacatois then, and then designed this in about 1895. And being a man that you can maybe describe as being a loose member of the arts and crafts community, he adopts a rush seat for the type and a little rush back panel like that. But otherwise, it's got the Scottish grasping arms, the Cacateurs arms, the triangular seat, and the narrow back. He goes on to develop that chair in a more abstract version, a more modernist version, if you like, in the following years. This is a chair that he called the Abingwood chair, but it has the Cacateurs arms, in this case flat, in the horizontal plane, and a slightly abstracted tall back, but the same type of proportions. And in that year, he gets the commission from Mr. Eastman, I think, Mr. Davison, who works for the Kodak company, to furnish the new Kodak shops. The new Kodak photography shops all over Europe. So he designs this chair for those shops. They are in Turin, Brussels, Moscow as well. You know, can you believe it? They're all over Europe. So that the humble little Fife Cacateurs chair is getting international exposure. I'm speculating, but it was noticed. There's no doubt that Richard Riemerschmidt, who designs this chair in 1907, is getting his inspiration from Walton, and then indirectly from the Fife Cacateurs. And apart from the addition of sort of alpine piercings, I think, in the back panel there, this is ultimately a Scottish chair. And not only that, it's a Fife chair. So the Cacateurs chair, the Fife Cacateurs chair, is a lingering and enduring form. And it's not just something which appeared briefly in the late 16th century and then disappears. It's always in our subconscious. And it remains in the subconscious of our furniture makers today. Not all furniture makers, I'm not talking about the Celtic airy-fairies like Tim Stead. I'm talking about the informed modern furniture makers like Angus Ross, who was going to appear as the featured craftsman in the Pitton Weem Festival until COVID put paid to that. But he knows about Scottish furniture, and he's still designing Cacateurs chairs. So when the Pitton Weem Festival comes back and Angus Ross comes back, we can all go and sit in his Cacateurs chairs and say, I know where that comes from. Thanks very much.